So you helped a lot of people understanding themselves, but also the dynamic within organizations and teams. And the iceberg is one of the models that you use in your work and also in your book that has been published recently, Conscious You, How to Become the Hero of Your Own Journey. I think you also brought it here tonight for those of you who are interested. But your model is slightly different from the one that Mark just introduced to us. Can you explain?
I think it's quite complementary.
Yes?
It's like a magnifying glass for the piece that Mark called perception, the world view. And in that sense, I sort of zoom in and give people a better understanding of how that world view is actually made up. And,
you brought some slides with you that we're going to show.
Yeah. Shall we have a look?
Please.
Okay. So, as a simple model here, of course, we've got what Christopher showed us before as well. At the very top of the iceberg, you have people's behavior, right? The behavior is driven by certain elements that are just below the waterline. So we have our thoughts and feelings. We definitely have our values, which that's the stuff that has been created through being socialized, right? So our values are strongly influenced by our family, by our peer group, by our nationality, by whatever political climate we grew up in. And in this particular model that I use, I then differentiate with the next level down, which I would call our needs. But needs here are not meant to be our physiological needs, but our psychological needs. And for me, I've been fiddling around with sort of the values and needs thing for quite a while because I work with nonviolent communication a lot, and I always found it a bit muddy what the difference exactly is. Now, my explanation for it, and it's not meant to be scientific, is that I would say values are something that we learn, and needs are something that we're born with. So whether I'm born in Berlin, Beijing, or Birmingham, I still end up having the same set of needs.
And maybe our needs won't change throughout our lifetime, but our values do.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So I think that's a good point, because when we look at the needs, essential one, of course, that we're all aware of is that we all have the need to be loved and to belong. We are mammals. We have a very long period of dependency on a caretaker, and if that hadn't happened, none of us would be sitting here. So that's something that's always active in us, and in organizations, of course, that doesn't show up necessarily as love and belonging. Then we call it acknowledgement, being appreciated, or even sometimes we call it being respected. So we find different words for it, but essentially it's still the same thing. On the other hand, we have a need for autonomous self-expression. So even infants, if Mark asked who has children here in this room, so if you ever seen an infant who wants to put something in their mouth that they found on the floor, what do they do if you take it away from them? They
scream.
Yeah, they scream, they protest, right? So even infants have this need to do the thing that they need to be doing at that moment, and that also never goes away. And of course, in an organizational reality, that shows up as a very strong aversion against micromanagement, for example. If somebody constantly tells me in a very minutiae way what I have to do, when and how, it's horrible, right? We feel smothered. We do have the need for security and predictability. So again, if you have children or have ever, we've all been children, so you might remember at a certain point in our lives we loved to be comforted with stories, for example. We all had our favorite books, and we knew exactly when our parents were changing the story to make it shorter, right? So children have this they can listen to the same audio tape 400 times, because for our nervous system, repetition creates comfort. It allows us to calm down and to feel centered. At the same time, though, we of course have a need for growth and stimulation, which is connected to uncertainty, because our nervous system can only continue to grow and develop if and when there is something new information, new stimulation. And then at the very center, and then we're done with this one, I would say there's something like, maybe we could call it a soul need, which is the need for meaning and significance. And that means that on some very, very core level, I want to know that the fact that I'm here and I've been on this planet made a difference, and that it mattered. Yeah, when we looked at that beautiful film that you had with the zooming in and the zooming out, especially with the zooming out motion, we can very quickly get to a place where we go, well, then what's the point, right? Like, I mean, we're this speck of dust floating through an endless universe, so who cares? So the meaning and significance piece, and I know a lot of the people here in the room work with this whole notion of purpose, and how do you elicit this drive for meaning and contribution in the people that we work with. And I think that's connected to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's get a little bit more practical. So we now understood there is a connection between our needs and the behavior that is visible to everyone. But how can that help me to actually change my behavior? Or maybe also to change the communication with others?
Yeah, no, that's where I think there might be a nice connection to what Mark just explained. So I do believe what is true, and you also said that many of us, we don't even really know our own iceberg. Yeah, so part of this micro exploration that we're going to do tonight is to help you gain a tiny bit more of a glimpse into what is the mechanics behind your own behavior. Why do you show up in a certain way? Because it's all motivated by meeting a value or need. And at the same time, in a negotiation, for example, if we can get an idea, what is the core need that our opponent is being driven by at that particular moment in time, then there might be something, as Mark said, if the point about annexing another country has something to do with respect at the core, then is there another way to meet that need that doesn't mean millions of people have to suffer as a result. So there's something about feeling, and even with our partner at the breakfast table, right? If we get more clear about, is this really about, are you upset that I moved this cup because for you it's about security and predictability. You always want your cup to be in that place, and it just makes you very anxious when I take it away. Or does it have something to do with your need for autonomous self-expression because you decided that's the place of the cup and it's part of your freedom of expression and I'm interfering with that? What is this all about? Or is it a sign of me not loving you if I take your cup and move it to a different place? So there's something that we can learn about our partner by looking at this model.
And then what can we do with that? If we understand for example, I'm in a relationship and my partner is jealous because there's a strong need for love and belonging. So I understand where this comes from, but does it already solve the problem?
No, it doesn't solve the problem. I don't, well, often it doesn't, sometimes it does, right? But I do think that self-awareness is the first step to just about anything. Right, so at least then I don't have to fight a proxy war where I try to solve something on a level where it's not. Right, so it's like that old, was it Václavík who had this example in his book about the guy who lost his keys, and then he looks under the street lamp, and then you come and you ask him, is that where you lost your keys? And you say no, but it's where the light is the brightest, that I can see. So and that's how we often end up in conflicts, that we end up talking and fighting about things that are not actually the core of the problem.
So actually this model also helps us to communicate our needs and by that also explain our behavior or how it comes, which might not be an excuse for it, but at least an explanation, and that starts a conversation, or at least we talk about the real core of the problem or the situation and not maybe about another layer that has actually nothing to do with the actual need.
Yeah. And to Mark's point, and somebody said, do you have some good why questions? If you look at this model now, you could probably formulate, for every level below the waterline, you could formulate at least one or two why questions that come to mind, right? So it can help us in crafting better questions, for example. And then we get better answers and have more information, right?
Now this all seems so logical and easy, and yet I can imagine that when you work with people, teams and organizations, they might be very surprised about what actual needs are driving their behavior. Yeah. Do you have some example maybe you would like to share with us that also gives us an understanding of how much you can move with one person or within the team if you understand your own iceberg and also the icebergs of the people around you?
Well, I would say that my observation in teams, for example, often is that when there is friction there, it happens on the level of needs and is not being able to communicate around. Again, we're fighting proxy wars, but we're never really addressing the thing that it's really about. And if I may go to the next slide. So I left out the center need for meaning and significance for a moment. But basically, when we look at this here, is we're constantly being pulled between different pulls. Those are also connected to the needs. So on the left hand, we have the need for love and belonging. So that's the pull of closeness. And the fear that is connected to feeling that need very strongly in me is the fear of rejection and separation. So if that's active in me, I probably have a certain kind of behavior that I display in a team. At the same time, does this thing in the middle work? Do I get a red dot? Or does
below is
No, the red dot should be in the middle, yeah.
Or does it explode if I...
We found out. Yeah, it's there, it's there.
I just wanted to overheat. That's right. Right, so if you go to the opposite pole, then you have the whole question of how much distance does somebody need. So the need here is for autonomous self-expression, and the biggest fear of people who have a very strong pull, or who are often spending a lot of time at that end of the spectrum, is that they're being engulfed or smothered. Then we have people who have the need for certainty and predictability, which has a lot to do with stability. And their biggest fear is loss of control and uncertainty. And then we have people who have the need for growth and stimulation. Their biggest fear is stagnation, growth and stimulation, and their biggest fear is stagnation or being stuck. And that has to do with the whole pull of change, right? And somewhere in that dynamic, you could probably chart an entire team and go, where do you spend a lot of your time? And how do you respond to somebody that is on the opposite end of the spectrum from you? So in one of the teams, to your question about a concrete example I was working with, we had two people who were just in very dire straits in terms of their relationship. They were constantly fighting. It's just not, there's a lot of stonewalling already going on. So they had reached a point of disconnect that didn't seem to them like they could bridge it anymore. And then when we explored this, it was funny because both of them had the sudden aha, because what they discovered about their dynamic was the woman in this situation is very much over here. The guy was very much over here. So what she did was she would say, first I need you to affirm that you like me and that you respect me and that you appreciate what I'm doing for this team, and then I'll give you your space. And he was saying, well, first you need to leave me, excuse my French, you need to leave me the fuck alone, and then I might tell you that I actually appreciate something about you. So they were playing this cat and mouse game where nobody was getting what they wanted, and they were constantly chasing each other. And once they realized that, we looked at, is it possible for you to give the other person a little bit of what they really need? And suddenly it became sort of solvable for them. And they said, well, yeah, maybe that is possible. And the guy ended up telling her what he felt she was contributing to the team and what a difference it made that she was there, and he gave her some concrete examples of where he had actually observed her in a way where he really did have respect. And she, on the other hand, realized that constantly running after him and tugging him and wanting to be liked by him was only pushing his buttons. So she took a step back and gave him more space. And somehow that dynamic was really central for where the team was at, and it shifted what the team was able to do together subsequently, because, of course, the other team members were somewhere on that spectrum as well. Just the conflict between those two was most extreme in a way.
So the lesson actually is also, if we behave out of fear, that is not the best way how to actually get what we want. Yeah. And the task is to confront our fears by ourselves first, and then we are more open to get actually or maybe we give others the possibility to give us what we actually want, because it's not out of fear, but yeah, without expectations, actually. I mean,
yeah, and you know, and I'm wondering, because that already sounds like a pretty high bar, right? For me to resolve my fears first before I can then have a healthy interaction with somebody else. I'm actually a strong advocate for let's explore the fears that we have together, because the moment we do that, we create a connection between different icebergs, right? So there's something that happens in the dynamic between people where friction is reduced just by the mere fact that I'm truly meeting and seeing another human being. And then out of that, there's often a process of creativity where we can together figure out how can we help each other to get what we need in a less passive-aggressive way than we might have done in the past.
So it's not so much about right away solving my own fear, but just to accept that it has something to do with me, and it's not the responsibility alone of my partner to take this fear from me.
Yeah, and to see, you know, when Mark talked about sort of crossing out the truth, if I look at my own truth, how much of my truth has been driven by that, and whatever my position on this map is, that's usually really old stuff. Right? I mean, we sort of found our place on this map when we were 5. So we're operating with a worldview or mindset of a 5-year-old in a relationship when we might be 30 or 40 or 50. So there's something about bringing enough attention to our own inner processes to update that map, and then go, well, maybe there's more to life than just my little corner of this chart.
I suppose you explored your own iceberg a couple of times, because it changes, right? I mean, it's not like we explore it one time and that's it. We need to explore it continuously. But when you first ran into this model and explored your own iceberg, was there any specific experience or aha moments that you had?
Well, one was definitely about but what I discovered about myself is I spent a lot of the time in my life over here and over here. And I really got very upset with people who were fulfilling this end of the spectrum. They pushed all of my buttons, right? It was very difficult for me to be around them because they were disorganized and sort of evasive and standoffish, and they were just really tough for me to deal with. So understanding this model allowed me to see that my salvation is actually on the exact polar opposite pole of where I'm spending most of my time. And then, lucky for me, I ended up marrying Olga, who's sitting right there. And I would say she spends a lot of time over here and has a very different relationship to authority. And so often in relationships, we end up fighting the very thing that attracted us to a partner initially, right? And then we try to beat it out of them. Luckily, we got to the point in our relationship where I really feel we became each other's masters or teachers. And I learned a lot about integrating this pole into my life more and speaking truth to power and not always being the coach that needs to be liked and needs to be pleasant, but sometimes the coach that gets fired because I said something that somebody found unacceptable or upsetting. So in a sense for me, if you think of this whole thing as a dance floor, it's just about being able to inhabit more places of the dance floor than the one that you learned was safe when you were 5.
That leads me to my next question. Is it easier to be in a relationship or to work with people who have the same needs?
I don't know. Actually, I think in an ideal team, for example, it would be great if you had somebody occupying, who had a center of gravity in all of these 4 different directions, because in a sense that would create a really amazing team if you had enough awareness in the team that they don't get trapped into the patterns that are connected to it if you act unconsciously, right? So in some ways, of course, it's pleasant to be around people who share something because it makes you feel validated in your truth. But it doesn't necessarily mean it makes you most successful And sometimes that you may even see in a mirror not like what you see, right? So I actually felt that people who were very needy and clingy could push my buttons, even though I know that that's potentially my own shadow as well. So I don't know, it can go either way. So.
Okay, thank you for this. I think we are now ready to start the exploration of our own icebergs, and you prepared an exercise for us.
Yeah. How much time do we have?
We have, let's say, 20 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah. So, I'm sorry I'm bombarding you with all of these different charts, but basically I've taken this chart now and created one that has even another level of detail. So you see the same 4 needs on here and the associated fears. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions around this because then that will help us with our own exploration. When we look at the left side here, and let's assume you were a person for whom it is really central, this whole piece around love and belonging, where when that seems to be not met, the fear of separation and rejection is triggered. What do you think is a particular gift, and what is a shadow of a person who spends a lot of time in their life there? What might they be very good at?
Caring for others.
Caring for others. Empathy. Mm-hmm. Sensitivity. Yeah. What might be their shadow?
Might change themselves for others.
Yeah. So they bend themselves in a pretzel. Attachment. Yeah, in a sense of being quite clingy and sticky. Mm-hmm.
Being hurt by other people.
Yeah. So when we look at it through that lens, then we could see the shadow really is to be needy and to be overly pleasing. And the gift is that they're caring attentive of others. Yeah, so they're great hosts. They can, they always make sure everybody's taken care of. If we look at the opposite end of the spectrum here, what do you think are the gifts and shadows associated with that corner?
Courage and vision.
Courage and vision.
Pragmatism, maybe also. Pragmatism, like
Pragmatism?
doing things.
Yeah. What else?
Respect. Giving others respect.
Yeah, respect. And what might be their shadow?
Narcissism.
Narcissism? Mm-hmm.
Running away.
Yeah. So, and I think Christopher said it in the beginning. One of my favorite quotes is by a statistician who said, all models are wrong and some of them are useful. So, take it in that vein, right? So the gift is self-directed. They give and take autonomy very freely. But at the same time, they can really push others away, come across as quite narcissistic, and overemphasize their independence. We go to the top. What are the shadows and gifts of somebody who spends a lot of time out here?
Planning.
Planning. What else? Reliable. Responsible. What's their shadow?
Adaptation to change.
Mm-hmm.
Stubborn.
Yeah, can be quite stubborn. Yeah. So reliability, structure, accountability, all of those things are wonderful with them. Their shadow is that they end up micromanaging and they're overly concerned about everything. So they tend to see a lot more risk than opportunity. And then for the last one down here, shadows and gifts.
They can be like motivated.
Mm-hmm.
Inspirational,
yeah. What else?
Free-spirited.
Free-spirited, yes. What's their shadow?
Restlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Chaotic.
Yeah. Right? So their shadow is often that they tend to resist and act out. Yeah. They're really grumpy if they feel somebody wants to put them in a box. And they're incredibly spontaneous and creative. And yeah. So the exploration for you is, let me see what happens when I click this. This is yet another, and by the way, you don't have to take notes now. You'll get the whole thing as a PDF after, I'm assuming you have everybody's email address,
Yes.
right? So that's another way to look at this, because just very quickly, in some sense, we could say wherever I am feeling a little stuck, whether it's here or down here, it doesn't really matter. My answer is always on the other side of the spectrum. So if I'm a person very much driven by this, then my transformation really means that I need to become more of myself, stand for my convictions, and experience the gift of solitude, which is something that somebody over here can do very easily. If I'm over here, my gift is to give myself fully, to show my vulnerability, and to have empathy with others, and that's something that those guys can do quite well. If I'm up here, my transformation is to accept the fluidity and non-permanence of life and to find comfort in change, which is something that those guys can do very well. And if I'm stuck down here, my transformation is to find beauty and depth and structure, accept the necessary and that which needs to be done. So in a sense, if whatever we feel is quite alien to us is probably the place where we experience the biggest growth. So the questions that we have for you here. Where do you think your own center of gravity is? How do you experience your gift? So given the center of gravity, what do you think you personally are quite good at? How does your shadow show up? What feedback have you probably heard more than once in your life? And which pole is most challenging for you? So where do you often experience conflict? So for me, the people that were on the opposite end, which were the very autonomously independent, often men, that really pushed a button for me, right? Because my thing about wanting to be liked was very challenged when somebody just didn't care about showing me that they liked me. Like for them, that was not important, right? So look at where do you find it challenging to be, or who to be with.